Good evening. Can you hear me? Is it work? No. So, um, any of you here for the first time? Yes. Okay. Um, have you done meditation before? Okay. So, just to let you know what we normally do um, this night, we start with some meditation, a little bit of meditation. This is mainly a teaching night, and so most of the time I'll be giving a talk. After the meditation, I'll start the talk with a slideshow. And the topic I just started last week is happiness, the art of happiness, based on this book by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. So we're looking at how to be more happy, how to work on happiness. So for the meditation, make yourselves comfortable. And it's fine to sit on a chair if sitting on the floor is not comfortable for you, but you can try sitting on the floor. And when we sit, we can have our legs arranged in whatever way is most comfortable for us. But whether you're sitting on the floor or you're sitting on a chair, try to keep your back straight, because keeping the back straight can help the mind to be more focused and clear and concentrated. But although we straighten the back, that doesn't mean being tense or tight. So try to be as relaxed as possible. So having a straight back, but at the same time be relaxed. And you might notice your shoulders. It's best if the shoulders are not tight and tense, but let them drop and be natural and relaxed as much as possible. And you can have your hands in your lap or on your knees. If you're accustomed to sitting with your hands on your knees, you can do that. Again, it's important to be comfortable. And one thing mentioned in the Tibetan tradition is with the eyes. If we close our eyes, which we might prefer to do, because then we can sort of shut out external objects that we might see and distract us, and just be able to have a more concentrated state of mind. But there's a little bit of a danger in closing the eyes completely, because that can lead to sleepiness, especially at the end of the day. If you've been busy working, running around, doing a lot of things, and you might be tired. So sitting down, relaxing, and closing the eyes can lead to sleepiness. But ideally, we don't want to fall asleep in meditation. We want to stay awake. So if you are feeling sleepy and think you might become sleepy during the meditation, a way to prevent that is keeping the eyes open just a little bit. And you can have your eyes looking down onto the floor in front of you. That way you're not going to be seeing so many things that might distract your attention. So you can try that, but if you find it difficult or uncomfortable, it is okay to close the eyes. But if you do so, just try to make sure that you stay awake. So one helpful way to be more relaxed is taking a few deep breaths. So breathe in. You can breathe in through your nose slowly and deeply as much as you can, and then just pause for a moment, and then let your breath go out through your mouth, but do it slowly, not in a rush, but just breathe out slowly through your mouth. And you can imagine if there's any tension in your body or in your mind, it goes out with the breath. and then it just disappears. So try that for 3 breaths, breathing in slowly, deeply, and then exhaling slowly through your mouth, letting go of any tension. And then after 3 breaths, you can go back to your normal rhythm of breathing. So then continue breathing in a normal or natural rhythm, and try not to control your breathing or regulate your breathing. Instead, just let go of that tendency to control and just allow your body to breathe as it normally does. So just let the breath flow in and flow out in a natural rhythm. So try to continue breathing that way for the rest of the time that we're meditating. And we're going to be using the breath as the focal object, or the object that we focus our mind on. But before beginning that, let's try to put ourselves into a positive frame of mind as to why we're here and why we're doing meditation and listening to this talk. So Buddhism says all of us, all living beings, just want to be happy and do not want to suffer or be unhappy. This is like a very deep and natural, instinctive feeling that we have, a yearning that lies deep within us. And it's completely okay to wish for happiness. There's nothing wrong with it. And also we have the right to be happy. We actually deserve to be happy. So let yourself get in touch with this wish to be happy and peaceful and free from suffering and problems. In other words, open up to and accept that feeling within yourself. Allow that feeling to be there. Don't judge it or push it away. And try to understand that this is a feeling everybody has. This is something we all share. So every human being, and in fact every living being, feels this way. They just want happiness and safety and comfort and peace, and do not want suffering or problems or pain. So every living being feels this way. And see if you can think how nice it would be if everyone could be happy and peaceful and free of pain and problems and suffering. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? Then see if you can feel the wish or the aspiration that what we're doing here tonight, doing this meditation and the other activities we're doing, may these activities be a contribution to that. May it help bring about peace and happiness for ourselves and for others, for all living beings. So try to keep whatever feeling of openness and kindness and friendliness you were able to generate, try to keep that in your mind as we continue the meditation. So try to continue having a caring, friendly attitude towards yourself, towards the other people around you, towards all the people in the world. And now focus your mind, concentrate your mind on your breathing. Continue to breathe in a natural way. And just with your mind, your awareness, observe the breath as it's coming in and going out. And try to stay with the breath without wandering away. But understand that that's not easy to do because our mind has the habit of wandering here and there, thinking about this and that all the time. So even though we try to focus it on one thing like the breath, it doesn't stay there very long. But thoughts start coming up. They can be thoughts of the past, memories, which can also include things that happen today, or thoughts of the future, plans for what you're going to do later tonight, tomorrow, and so forth. So all kinds of thoughts come and go in our mind all the time. So they will continue to happen while we're meditating. So don't be upset or surprised. Just understand that's the nature of our mind. But at the same time, try not to let your mind wander away and get all caught up in these thoughts. Instead, let go of the thoughts, put them aside, and come back to the breath. So use the breath as a kind of anchor, a kind of base, a kind of home that you can bring your awareness back to when it wanders away and gets caught up in thoughts. So thoughts are impermanent. They come and go in the mind like clouds that come and go in the sky. So if we just ignore them, let them go, put them aside, they will go. And then we can just come back to the breath. So try to stay with the breath as much as you can. And when you notice your mind has wandered away from the breath and is thinking about something else, put that other object, that thought aside, and come back to the breath. So it can be helpful to think of this kind of meditation as giving yourself a break from the usual busy activity that goes on in your mind. So it's a kind of something you do for yourself, something you do for your mind, mental hygiene. So don't feel bad if the mind keeps wandering away. One thing that's helpful is to just say to yourself, thought or thinking. You give a sort of mental label to what's going on. Just say thought or thinking and then come back to the breath. And try to see the breath as a kind of home, coming back to a place of peace and quiet in the present, the here and now, rather than the mind running all over the place with busy thoughts. Now, for the next few minutes, I'd like to ask you to reflect on a few things related to the talk which will follow and this topic that we're looking at, the topic of happiness. So bring to mind an experience that you've had of being happy. Could have been something today or yesterday or in the recent past, a time when you felt really happy. Now, see, see if you can identify the causes or reasons or factors that gave rise to that experience of happiness. And now ask yourself, do you think you can deliberately or consciously give rise to the experience of happiness in yourself whenever you wish to? In other words, can you bring yourself into a happy state of mind just on your own as you wish? So those thoughts that I asked you to think or reflect on relate to what we're going to look at tonight. uh, I just want to get the right screen. Okay, so this is the second talk on this topic of the art of happiness. And I thought to just start by going through some of the main points that we covered last week. For those who were here last week, this can be a reminder for you. And those who weren't here last week can get some idea what we looked at last week. So this book, as I mentioned before, it's actually written by an American psychiatrist, Dr. Howard Cutler, in conversation with the Dalai Lama. So he attended talks by the Dalai Lama, and he also had private conversations and interviews with the Dalai Lama. And so it's talking about different aspects of happiness. So this is one of the quotes in the beginning of the book, something that the Dalai Lama said. I believe that the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. So this is very much based on Buddhist views, Buddhist ideas, that, as I mentioned during the meditation, we and all other people and all other beings basically wish to be happy. And not only that, but we also have the right to be happy. It's our right. It's like human right, sentient being right. And we also have the ability to be happy. So everybody can be happy. And not just sort of fleeting, momentary experiences of happiness, but according to Buddhism, we have the potential to achieve really incredible experience of happiness, which lasts. It doesn't end, it doesn't come and go, but it's continuous and long-lasting. And there's sort of higher and higher levels of happiness that we can achieve, all the way up to, excuse me, the state that we call enlightenment or Buddhahood. And this is a state of complete happiness and no more suffering, no more problems. So every living being has the ability to achieve that state, which the Buddha himself achieved. Although it takes time, it's not something we can do overnight or even in a couple of years, but it's a long-term goal, long-term activity, but it is possible. And this idea isn't just an idea or a theory that was made up by the Buddha, but it was based on his own experience, working on his mind. So the Buddha was once a person like ourselves who had problems and suffering and unhappiness. He wasn't always a Buddha. But by looking at his mind and working on his mind, he found a way to transform the mind and achieve this state of happiness and freedom from suffering. So that's the way to do it. The way to achieve this happiness is by working on the mind, training the mind. And as we're going along in this course, we'll learn more about what that actually means, what it means to train the mind. But to summarize the meaning of training the mind, there was a quotation we had last week from the book. His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, "We start by identifying those factors which lead to happiness and those factors which lead to suffering. Then once we've done that, we set about gradually eliminating the factors that lead to suffering and cultivating those that lead to happiness." So in other words, we build up the things, the causes that bring happiness, and we gradually eliminate the ones that bring suffering. So that is the way of doing it, the way of achieving happiness. And also we looked at the fact that it's not necessarily selfish to seek happiness. Some people might have that idea. They might think that seeking one's own happiness isn't a good thing. It's selfish. We should only care about others and not care about our own happiness. So in response to that, Howard Cutler mentioned that scientific studies show that people who are happy are more caring about others, more likely to give and help others, whereas people who are unhappy, miserable, depressed, tend to be more kind of self-absorbed, absorbed into themselves, and not so likely to get out there and help other people. So it's not the case that, being happy, wanting to be happy is selfish. In fact, it's the best way to help others. If you really want to help others, you got to take care of yourself and make sure you are happy. And then you have happiness in yourself to share with others. You don't want to share your grumpiness with others. You don't want to share your depression with others. You want to share happiness with others. So you need happiness to be able to share that with others. But we also looked at different kinds of happiness. Not all happiness is the same. One distinction is between uh, genuine happiness and just pleasure. Um, Another way of calling pleasure would be sense pleasures. For example, when we look at beautiful things or we hear beautiful sounds, we smell nice odors, we taste delicious foods and drinks, and feel pleasant sensations in our body. So these are the five senses. We have these five senses, five different ways of experiencing things. And when we have pleasant experiences with our five senses, then this is what's called sense pleasure. So it's more sort of physical. Not really physical, it's still part of the mind, but it's more based on physical experiences, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and so on. And so that's one kind of happiness. And then another kind of happiness, which is more what we call happiness, is a more internal feeling. And ideally, it's more based on having good feelings, good attitudes, good uh, qualities towards other people. For example, when we feel love for somebody or feel love for other people and we care about them and we want to help them and we do help them, so that brings another kind of happiness. It's a deeper, more spiritual kind of happiness than just like eating an ice cream or listening to beautiful music. Although that can also be a kind of spiritual happiness for some people. But another way we can differentiate these two is I think pleasure generally can be quite self-centered. You know, it's like I'm enjoying myself. I'm having this wonderful experience. So we're kind of all wrapped up in ourself and our own happiness, pleasure. Whereas happiness that we experience in relationships with other people, for example, where we care, we have this feeling of loving and caring and bonding, connecting with other people in a very positive way, sharing our experiences with others and so on. That brings another kind of happiness, a deeper sort of happiness. And in recent years, I've heard that some scientists are also differentiating these two different kinds of happiness, and they use the term. It's a funny word, but anyway, eudaimonic. It's from the Greek word. It was first used by Aristotle to describe a certain type of experience where we have more of a sense of meaning and purpose in life rather than just chasing after pleasures. Yeah. So it's spelled eudaimonic. Eudaimonic happiness. And so eudaimonic happiness is more the first kind of happiness. And then the other that they identify, they call it hedonic happiness, as in hedonism. You know that term, hedonism? It's like eat, drink, or be merry, for tomorrow you will die. That kind of philosophy. You know, just enjoy as much pleasure as you can in life. So that's the hedonic kind of happiness. So apparently they're doing some experiments into these two different types of happiness. So not all anyway, the point is not all happiness is the same. Not all good experiences are the same. There are different levels. And then also Buddhism describes even higher kinds of happiness that come from meditation. When we develop our mind, we learn to concentrate, we develop love and compassion, universal love and compassion, we develop wisdom, we can achieve higher levels of happiness, which are greater than what we normally experience. And we also looked at one way that we can have more happiness is to learn to be content. So contentment means being happy with what you have, being happy with how much you have, being happy with yourself the way you are, as opposed to comparing yourself with other people and then thinking, oh, that person has more than me, that person is better than me, smarter than me, more beautiful than me, has whatever, things that I don't have. So comparing ourselves with others often leads to unhappiness, feeling that, you know, I'm I'm not as good as other people. I don't have as much as other people, and that can make us go down. So instead of doing that, instead of comparing ourselves with others and feeling somehow inferior, left out, deprived, jealous, it can also lead to jealousy and envy, which are really painful. So that kind of mind often leads to unhappiness. Contentment, on the other hand, is learning to be happy with what we do have. And then the Dalai Lama said, even if we have factors conducive to happiness, like wealth, health, friends, I mean, we do need a certain amount of these things to be happy. But just having those things alone doesn't guarantee happiness. Instead, we need to learn how to have a calm, peaceful, and altruistic mind, meaning caring about others, being able to have good relationships with others, being warm and caring towards others. So we need to learn how to deal with our mind and not have our mind taken over by unhappy, negative states like anger, fear, frustration, and jealousy, and so forth. Because if those things come up in our mind, even if we have all the great circumstances in our life, we can still be very unhappy. So it's important to learn how to manage the mind, how to keep it positive. So this is just a brief review of what we did last week, and we'll carry on from there. Um, the importance of the mind. So this is the words of Howard Cutler. He says, once our basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter are met, the message is clear. We don't need more money. We don't need greater success or fame. We don't need the perfect body or even the perfect mate. Right now, at this very moment, we have a mind, which is the basic equipment we need to achieve complete happiness. So this is very much the Buddhist view that the real causes of happiness lie within ourselves, within our mind, rather than in external things like money and food, clothing, shelter, even other people. I mean, of course, it's important to have friends and companions, but um, you know, that alone doesn't guarantee happiness. You can be surrounded by lots of people who love you and care about you, but you can still be very unhappy inside, very depressed. So the most important thing is our own mind. And according to Buddhism, within our mind, we do have the ability, the possibility, the potential to achieve happiness. So now let's look at that and how to do that. So this is the Dalai Lama's recipe for happiness. How to have more happiness. So he says, first, we need to identify the factors or causes that lead to happiness and those that lead to suffering. So the word factor or cause here mainly refers to mental ones, mental factors, aspects of our mind. So which mental factors, mental states lead to happiness and which lead to suffering? So there's a lot of material about this in Buddhism, and we'll go into it a little later. But again, this doesn't mean that we only work on our mind and not on external things, because of course, if there are factors in our life, in our environment that are disturbing us, making us unhappy, and if there are ways we can deal with those and bring about changes in those, as long as we do it in an ethical way, don't do things that are harmful, that cause suffering or illegal. So if we can work with the external conditions in a non-harmful way, in a legal way, then it's fine to do that. It's fine to do that. But that's not always possible. It's not always possible to fix things around us. Are you following me? You look puzzled. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's okay to try to fix things out there, but that isn't always possible. We can't fix everybody, and we can't fix everything in the world and make everything just perfect, just the way we want it to be. So we do have to accept that we have limitations. But even if we can't fix or change the external factors, external things in the world, we can fix our mind. There are things we can do with our mind so that, even if things around us aren't going very well, we can still have a peaceful and happy state of mind rather than a unhappy, depressed, miserable one. So when the Dalai Lama or Buddhism talks about the factors that lead to happiness and those that lead to suffering, it's mainly talking about the internal ones. And then he also says, recognize how those factors that lead to happiness do help, how they are beneficial, and those that lead to suffering bring harm, not only to oneself, but also to others and to the world. So I'm going to take you through this a little bit later. What he's saying here is that we need to see how certain, this kind of state of mind, this particular mental factor really disturbs me, it disturbs my mind, and it also disturbs other people, and it can create all these problems in the world. So if we can see very, very clearly how this is the cause of suffering, this does lead to unhappiness, then that becomes very clear in our mind. And on the other hand, this particular state of mind helps me, makes me happier, but it also brings benefit to other people, brings benefit to the world. So if we can really clearly see this in our experience, how this one leads to suffering and this one leads to happiness, then naturally, on our own, we will want to have less of this one and more of this one. So it's not a question of somebody imposing this on us from the outside, but it's something that comes from within ourselves. It's something we really, really want to do on our own. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? And then make effort to cultivate those factors that bring happiness and eliminate those that bring suffering. Okay, so he says, so this is something you can do on your own. If you have the energy and time, you can just watch your own mind and watch your own life, your own experiences, and figure out for yourself which things really bring happiness and which things really bring suffering. So this is something you can do on your own. But also the Buddha himself, in his teachings, he spoke a lot about this based on his own experiences, what he discovered in himself, which factors in the mind lead to suffering and problems and which ones lead to happiness and peace. So we can explore that and see if it's true. Because the Buddha always said that with his teachings, he said, don't just blindly believe what I'm saying, but check it out for yourself, investigate it for yourself, see if it's true or not. So in this book, Art of Happiness, it doesn't go into details with these points. It doesn't go into details, at least so far, maybe later in the book. But, it doesn't go into details about which are the factors that lead to happiness, which one leads to suffering. So I'm just going to pick some material from other sources, from traditional Buddhist sources. So Buddhism describes various, sometimes they're called poisons, but maybe the word toxin is more kind of relevant for contemporary. People are very concerned about detoxifying themselves, getting rid of the toxins in their body. But it's good to realize we have toxins in our mind, mental toxins. These are mental states that harm us. And so within Buddhism, there are different lists of these, but I'm not going to go into all of them, but just a couple of short ones. One is in terms of three things. These are called the three toxins or poisons, mental poisons. And these are said to be the three main ones: greed, hatred, and ignorance. Greed is, for example, wanting lots of things, money, more than we really need. So there's lots of different things we can be attached to and have attachment and grasping and clinging and greed for not just material things, but also knowledge. We can also be very attached to knowledge, to experiences, fame, and so on. So we can get attached to just about anything. So greed involves not being satisfied with what we have, but wanting more and more and more, and then being very clingy to things. So we can see lots of examples in the world of how greed leads to suffering and problems for a lot of people. People engage in business deals, which end up cheating. I can't remember exactly what happened in America some years ago. But there was this kind of activity going on, and it ended up cheating a lot of people out of their retirement funds. You heard about that? Yeah, it was. When it comes to economics, I don't manage very well. I don't understand how things work. But anyway, something was going on, and a lot of people had, their savings, their retirement savings, they lost all of it or big chunks of it or whatever. Just because some people were greedy, they weren't satisfied with how much money they had. They wanted more and more and more and more, and ended up making other people very, very poor. So there's all kinds of things like that going on in the world. Very sad. And hatred. I think it's very clear how that leads to suffering and problems, war and terrorism and so forth. Ignorance is a little more difficult to understand. I'm not going to go into too much detail with that tonight, but ignorance is not understanding reality, not understanding things the way they are, but seeing things in mistaken ways. Not, yeah. Just one example of that we could um, relate to is just not understanding how things work, what causes happiness and what causes suffering. So, for example, those greedy people who cheated other people out of their money, they probably thought this was going to bring them happiness. Okay, they didn't really think clearly, what they were doing. They were just greedy and very narrow-minded and thinking about some temporary happiness that they would get. And in the end, it led to a lot of suffering. So that's one example of ignorance, not understanding the way things work, the cause and effect of things, what really brings happiness, what really brings suffering. And again, people who engage in war, who try to grab other people's land and property and so forth and get into wars and conflicts, thinking this is going to bring happiness, but it just brings more suffering. So that's one example of ignorance, not knowing what really brings happiness and peace and doing that, not knowing what really brings suffering and avoiding that. So that's one kind of ignorance, but there are other more subtle forms of ignorance. But according to Buddhism, that's our basic problem. Our basic problem is ignorance. We just don't understand things correctly. We have a lot of mistaken ideas, mistaken conceptions of things, and we act on those and end up just creating more suffering and problems for ourselves and others rather than happiness. So those are said to be the three most important main mental toxins that cause suffering. And there's another list of 5, which includes those 3, plus jealousy and pride or arrogance. So this is just an example of an explanation in Buddhism as to what are the factors that lie within our mind that lead to suffering. Now I'm going to focus on one of these, anger or hatred, and just mention what is explained in the Buddhist teachings, but also from my own experience and things that I've heard and so on. What are the ways in which it leads to suffering and problems? But before I do that, just a note, the Dalai Lama says anger is not always negative, but hatred always is. And it seems what he's saying, in some cases, anger arises related to compassion. For example, you see somebody or you hear about somebody who's doing things that harm others, that cause suffering to others or to yourself. Somebody is causing suffering. Somebody is doing something harmful. It's completely natural that anger arises. Yeah, because we have compassion for the victims, for those who are being harmed, and naturally we feel angry at the perpetrator, the person who is doing the harm. So that kind of anger, he says, is not necessarily negative, and it can lead to positive action. You know, when people are angry and upset about wrong things that are going on, harmful things that are going on, it stirs them to action to try to put a stop, to put an end to these harmful things. Like we were talking about last week with animals. You know, there's a lot of people who are very concerned about the way animals are treated by human beings, and they're, you know, trying to engage in activities that will do as much as possible to benefit animals and stop the harm that's done to animals. And it's working. Yeah, I think to a certain extent it is working. Not completely, but for example, fox hunting in England, you know, as far as I know, that's been banned. That used to be a national sport. Poor little foxes, you know, being chased by all these horses and dogs, and terrible. So people, you know, started making noise about that and managed to get it stopped. So that's no longer allowed. So that's just an example of how anger over harmful activities, non-compassionate activities, can stir people to actions that can bring about changes, beneficial changes. Um, but then there are other cases where anger um, doesn't lead to good action, it leads to negative actions. So anger leads to war, it leads to killing, it leads to violence, to abuse, to rape, to all kinds of horrible things. So when anger leads to that kind of harmful activity, then that's negative, that's harmful. So what are some of the problems that come from anger? So one, we can experience in our bodies. We can feel the stress when we're angry, when there's anger in our mind. I think, you know, if we pay attention to our body, we can feel it's stressful. We feel tight and stressed, not sort of peaceful and relaxed. And apparently, I read a book. I didn't read the book. I just saw the book. The title of the book was "Anger Kills." It was written by a doctor, and so apparently there's a lot of evidence of the harmful effects of anger on our body, our physical body. For example, it can lead to heart disease, even cancer, high blood pressure. So it's actually harmful for our physical body, for our life, for our health. Um, and then it has effects on our mind. When we feel angry, then our mind is not peaceful, it's not happy. Instead, it's turbulent, unhappy. I think of it, they use this expression in the teachings like boiling water. You know, when water is boiling, it's all, it's not sort of calm, peaceful. So our mind's like boiling water when we're angry. Another thing is it can be difficult to think clearly and rationally when our mind is all caught up in anger, and we're trying to make a decision about something. It's difficult to think clearly. Instead, our mind is more motivated by emotion, just kind of raw emotion. We just want to go and hit somebody or do something violent, which, you know, might not be a very wise thing to do. It might just make things worse rather than better. So the kind of decisions that we make, or the kind of thoughts, ideas that come up in our mind when we're angry, might not be so intelligent. Do you agree? Yeah. So that's another effect that it has on our mind. Better to cool down. Try to cool down your anger, and be in a more calm state of mind, and then make your decision rather than make your decision while your mind is under the influence of anger. Also, it can interrupt just our daily life. For example, sleeping. It can be hard to get to sleep at night, and even if you do fall asleep, you might wake up during the night and start thinking again about your anger and not be able to get back to sleep. So it can be difficult to sleep. It can, if you're really angry, you might lose your appetite. You don't want to eat. You don't. Even if you do eat, you probably don't enjoy what you're eating. If your mind is very, very disturbed by anger and any other things, if you try to listen to music or watch a film or go for a walk or things you might normally enjoy, yeah, things you normally enjoy. But when your mind is caught up in anger, you don't really enjoy anything. And so those are things that the effects that anger has on ourselves, but then also for other people. When we know from our own experience, when we're around somebody who's angry, it's not very pleasant, is it? You don't really want to be around that person. And you can also feel scared. Like, what are they going to do? What are they going to say? Are they going to turn to anger on me? So it's disturbing to other people around us, even people we love and care about, and we don't want to hurt them. But, our anger can be problematic for them, can disturb them. And then if we do lash out at other people with our anger, then our relationships can be damaged, even totally broken. I'm sure there are marriages and other relationships that get completely cut off due to anger. Also jobs. I guess there are cases of people losing their jobs because of anger. Getting angry a lot at work, they get fired. So it can affect your life. And if we're in the worst case is if it leads to violent behavior, even crimes, so many murders or other kinds of violent behavior. And then you can end up in prison, sometimes the rest of your life. I know one man in America who, when he was just 19 years old, I don't know the circumstances, he didn't tell me, but he killed somebody. He told me he would just, he had the habit of just acting out his emotion. Whatever emotion came up, he would just go with it and act it out. So he ended up killing somebody one day. And then he's been in prison since then. I don't know why. It's crazy, but he's been in prison for about 50 years, 45, 50 years. He's probably never get out. The American prison system isn't very good. Anyway, so that's really sad. That's very, very sad when you destroy your life like that. And other people's lives as well. I mean, the person you kill, that person has family, parents, brothers, sisters, friends, so their life gets destroyed as well. So there's so many repercussions for so many people. And then, of course, the bigger problems like war, terrorism. So these are mostly motivated by anger, by hatred. And then in the Buddhist explanation of things, we also create karma. So not just in terms of the immediate effect that our actions have, but that's a long-term effect. When we do an action, it leaves some imprint in our mind that will be carried along with the mind into the future and bring even more problems and more suffering in the future. This life, future lives. And then in terms of meditation, spiritual path, it's an obstacle to meditation because we can get angry when we're meditating. I know, it's happened to me. So you can be sitting there, trying to meditate and your mind can get stirred up with anger. So then it disturbs your meditation. And if you can't meditate properly, you won't be able to achieve these positive qualities that can come from meditation. For example, compassion, loving kindness, higher states of mind, shamatha. Shamatha means single-pointed concentration. It's like a very blissful, very peaceful state of mind. And then higher states, liberation from suffering, enlightenment. So anger is an obstacle to these. So we can't hold on to anger, keep anger in our mind, and be able to achieve those things. But the good news is we can get rid of it. Anger can be eliminated slowly over time. It's possible to be free of anger. So these are just examples of or just an example of how you can look at a particular state of mind and how it leads to different kinds of problems, both for oneself and for others and for the world, and both short term and also long term. So if you meditate on this and you think about this and you can really see that, yeah, this is true, then it motivates you to want to do something about your anger instead of just, letting it be there, letting it continue and perpetuating it. And next, I'm going to show the benefits of loving kindness. But how about if we take a break first? We usually have a halftime break, about 10 minutes. And there's refreshments upstairs, tea, coffee. Example of a state of mind that, according to Buddhism, is the cause of happiness. This is one of the factors that leads to happiness. Is loving kindness. So that is when we feel caring for another person or other people and wanting them to be happy and doing what we can to make them happy. That's the meaning of loving kindness. So there's a lot of teachings in Buddhism on how we can develop our loving. We already have it. It's a natural state of mind that everybody has, but we can develop it more and more so that we can feel it for more and more people, and not just people, but animals and all living beings. And in the teachings, it mentions uh, benefits of loving kindness. So this is right out of the Buddhist text. One is that our own mind will be more happy and we will be more physically healthy. So this is again something we can check for ourselves, but I think we can, not too easy, not too difficult to recognize how happy we feel when we have love, when that feeling of love is there in our mind and our heart. It's such a beautiful feeling. So we feel happy and physically healthy, just as anger is harmful for us physically. You know, and loving kindness is good for us physically. And I think I've heard studies have been done, not maybe not on loving kindness, but compassion. There's been a lot of studies done on compassion, which is quite similar. And it's found that yes, it is good for us physically, good for our health and our long life and our immune system and all of those kind of things. Another benefit is other people will love us. So if we are loving, caring, kind, compassionate, then others will respond in the same way towards us. They will love us. And then when we need help, they will help us and protect us. Okay. So I think we can see that as well. Someone who's nasty and cruel and mean and horrible, doesn't inspire love, and nobody really wants to help that person if that person's in trouble. Someone who's very loving and caring and kind, everybody wants to help them and take care of them. So this is what we will get if we cultivate loving kindness. We will sleep better at night. So just as anger disturbs our mind and makes it hard to sleep. So if we can go to sleep with loving kindness in our mind, then we'll be able to sleep well. We'll have pleasant dreams, not nightmares, and wake up feeling refreshed. Our appearance will become more radiant, smiling and relaxed. We'll communicate more easily with others. So it affects, you can see that, when someone like the Dalai Lama, for example, when you see him or just photos of him, he's just very radiant and smiling and relaxed looking. And that's, of course, very attractive to people. People are attracted to that. And also having loving kindness in our heart makes it easier to communicate with people. We won't have so many communication problems. We'll feel more comfortable with people, relaxed with them, able to talk to them, and so on. So have more friends. Have more friends with loving kindness. Then, in terms of our meditation practice, it's also a very good state of mind to have for meditation. Um, because naturally our mind is more peaceful as opposed to anger that makes our mind very disturbed and turbulent. So loving kindness makes our mind peaceful. So then it's easier to concentrate. And so if we want to develop our mind in meditation, it will go better if we have loving kindness, but also other things as well. Other things we may want to concentrate on, your work, projects. If you're painting a picture or writing a book or building a table or whatever it is you're doing, you'll be able to succeed better because you're able to focus and stay focused on what you're doing. So things will go better if you have more loving kindness as opposed to anger and hatred. Yeah, because when you're angry, you tend to make mistakes. You're not so focused on what you're doing, and your mind is kind of messed up. So more likely to make mistakes. Then it also mentions that at the time of death, at the end of our life, when we're in our last hours and minutes before we die, our mind will be more likely to be calm and clear and not confused. And that's important from the Buddhist point of view because death is kind of gateway to the next life. It's not that we just finish and nothing carries on, but Buddhism believes in rebirth. So some part of us, it's our mind actually, that goes on and takes another life. And the kind of life that we take, where we're born, the circumstances of our life, and so forth, are affected by how we live our life now, the kind of karma we create, but also the state of mind we have at the time of death. So that's said to be a very important factor that will affect our next life. So the ideal is to be able to be in a calm, peaceful state of mind at the time of death, not one that is agitated, frightened, angry. Some people die angry. It's very sad. It's understandable because if they're in pain, I mean, it's hard to be peaceful when you're in pain. And also, some people are just angry that they're dying. They don't really want to die. So they can be very angry at their doctors and nurses and family and everybody in the world and God and everything. So it's very sad. It's very tragic to die angry. So it's much better if we can die in a positive, peaceful state of mind. So if during our life we make ourselves more familiar with loving kindness and have that as our habit, a more kind of what's the word, default state. We can try to have loving kindness rather than anger as our default mode, our default state. Then there's a greater chance at the time of death, even when we're dying, even if there's pain, our mind can be more clear and unconfused. And I spoke to a woman who, because when I was with my mother when she died, and even though her body was full of cancer, she didn't have any pain. And I was quite surprised about that because the doctor said she might have pain. And I spoke afterwards to a nurse who told me she'd seen a lot of people die. She was a cancer nurse. And she said in her experience, the state of mind that people had a great effect on their physical state, whether they had pain or not. So people who were angry or afraid or grasping, unhappy about dying and so on, people who had a negative state of mind had more pain. And even if they were given pain medication, it wasn't effective. It wasn't so effective. On the other hand, people who were in a positive state of mind, like my mother, she was in a really positive state of mind. People who have a positive state of mind as they're dying have less pain, and even if they do have pain, it is helped by pain medication. So that was her experience. The state of mind we have at the time of death is very much will affect even our pain levels. So it's good to try to have a positive state of mind at the time of death, because then that means less pain, easier death, and a better rebirth. So that's the last point. And our next life will be a good one. We'll be born in a good situation. So these are points mentioned in the Buddhist texts, and it can be helpful to think about them and check. We can't check all of them. Maybe the last few we can't really check if they're true or not. But the first we can. So if we can examine our own experience and the experience of other people and see that it's true, yeah, it seems to be true, then that can motivate us to want to put more effort into generating loving kindness. So, the reason I wanted to talk about this, like to show the problems that come from anger, the good things that come from loving kindness, is to show that there are certain states of mind that lead to happiness, and other states of mind that lead to suffering. So if we can see this, if we can become convinced about this through our own experience and looking at the experience of other people, then that can motivate us to want to do something, to change our mind, to do what we can to change our mind. And according to Buddhism, as the Dalai Lama mentions here, it does take time and effort and discipline. We have to work. It's not something that's just going to come. You can just pop something in our mouth and have instant happiness. So it does take time to work on the mind. Um, and one thing that might be an obstacle for us doing this work, to do this work, is if we're not completely convinced that it's possible to change our mind. So according to Buddhism, it is possible. Buddhism says we can change our mind because we have Buddha nature. We have the potential to become enlightened in our mind. And also the Dalai Lama says he believes all human beings have the potential for compassion. All sentient, all beings have the ability to generate compassion. And he also says that the basic underlying nature of human beings is gentleness, kindness. But not everybody might find that easy to believe because there's been a view in the West for quite a while, a few centuries it seems, that human beings are basically self-centered and competitive and greedy and aggressive. And so Howard Cutler addresses this point. Have any of you encountered this in your education, in your studies in school and university? Have you encountered this idea that human nature is basically bad? We're bad. Yeah, probably because of all the bad things happening in the world, all the violence and war and terrorism and so forth. There's more negativity than yeah. But Howard Cutler says that in Western science, Western philosophy, and Western psychology for the last few hundred years, this has been the dominant view. So I'm just gonna yeah. So human beings, people, are we basically selfish and aggressive, or are we gentle and altruistic, like His Holiness says? So as Howard Cutler says, the dominant view in the West since 1700s has been that humans are violent, competitive, self-centered, and always fighting. So he says some philosophers have pointed out good qualities in human beings, but a lot of philosophers have pointed out these bad qualities, and this has somehow become the dominant view in Western science. But it's changing. He says in the last few decades, hundreds of scientific studies have shown that aggression is not innate and violent behavior is influenced by biological, social, situational, and environmental factors. So, in other words, human beings are not by nature aggressive. Aggressiveness and violence and so forth arise because of these other factors, for example, family, social, and so forth. So these kind of factors. And he mentions there's been a number of studies and also conferences to discuss this. So he mentions this one conference that took place in Sevilla in Spain. Um, So he said in 1986, a group of 20 top scientists from around the world uh, wrote and signed this statement on violence. It's called the 1986 Sevilla Statement on Violence. And in that statement, they, of course, acknowledged that violent behavior does occur, but they categorically stated that it is scientifically incorrect to say that we have an inherited tendency to make war or act violently. That behavior is not genetically programmed into human nature. That's good news. And so, again, it's not denying that there is war and violence and cruelty and so on and so forth, but these are not our inherent qualities, and instead they're a result of other factors. And Howard Cutler also says um, most researchers in this field of human nature feel that we have the potential to become either gentle and caring or violent and aggressive, depending on training, depending on influences. So we have both potentials. We could end up violent and aggressive, but we also could end up gentle and caring. And he says some scientists have tried to determine what are the factors that will enable a child to develop this gentle and caring nature rather than the violent and aggressive one. So they've identified some factors, conditions. One is the parents are able to regulate their own emotions. How many parents are able to do that? At least try. Because, if parents are out of control, if they are acting, violently, and I hear so many stories of this, especially under the influence of alcohol, alcoholic parents who are violent and come home and beat their children. So that's certainly going to have an effect on the child. So parents being able to regulate their emotions and who model caring behaviors so they themselves act in caring, loving ways. They set appropriate limits on the child's behavior. Don't just let the child do whatever they want, but they're also not overly strict on the child. Teaching the child that they themselves are responsible for their behavior and so on. So, anyway, these are some of the factors, conditions that will enable a child to become more gentle and caring rather than violent and aggressive. And then, oh yeah, I wanted to mention this. If you're interested, Mind and Life is these conferences that happen every year with scientists and the Dalai Lama. So this was the one that happened in, I think it's 2015. And very, very interesting. They're talking about perception and conception in the self. But in session 7, it's a presentation by Mathieu Ricard. You've heard of him? It's a wonderful presentation. He's talking about this very topic of human nature. Are we violent? Are we caring? And he's, of course, making the case that we are basically altruistic and compassionate and so on. It's a really beautiful video. So if you're interested, it's on YouTube. So you just type in Mind and Life XXX, meaning 30, and then it's session 7. Very inspiring. And then Howard Cutler says, if we just look into just observing a healthy infant child, then it's hard to deny the underlying gentle nature of human beings. Right? So I think babies mostly are like this, yeah. They have these beautiful qualities and naturally loving as well.
Only like this when they are guests.
Guests. Of course, they can look otherwise. They can look angry and they can cry and so on. But just to see that this potential exists, and apparently there have been experiments done as well on very young children, as young as 3 months old or 1 month or 1 year old, and it seems that the experiments show that children do prefer helping behavior rather than unhelping behavior. The scientists see that as a factor that they do already have a tendency towards altruism and compassion rather than Violence. Okay, so then Howard Cutler says um, we can make a decision to become happy just in the same way that we make a decision to get married or have children, become a lawyer, and so on. So in our life, we do sometimes decide to embark on some activity like studying to be a lawyer or a doctor or deciding to get married, set up a family, have children, and so on. So we make this kind of decision because of seeing there's something beneficial there, something useful there, something we want there, and then we go for it. So said in the same way that we do that, we can also make the decision to become happy, to learn about the factors that lead to happiness, and take positive steps to build a happier life. So we can do that. That's why in the beginning I was asking you to think about that and ask yourself, is it possible for me to choose and decide to be happy whenever I wish? So some people may not think so. They may think that they just have to wait for happiness to sort of fall from heaven in their lap and not something they can actually do themselves. But Buddhism says it is possible to learn what makes us happy and then cultivate those qualities, those inner qualities that do bring about more happiness, such as loving kindness and compassion. So this is something we can choose to do, choose to be more happy and less unhappy. Um, yeah, it says that the turning towards happiness is a valid goal, and the conscious decision to seek happiness in a systematic manner can profoundly change the rest of our lives. So, are there any questions about this? I was going to lead a little meditation based on something the Dalai Lama wrote in here. So we can do that. And I thought before we do that, any questions or comments or
Happiness is an industry. It's like in Denmark we are used to that our education is taken care of by the government, and we can get married for free, and we can do all these things, but we cannot learn to be happy. We cannot get the aid to be happy. We have to find that for ourselves.
can get the aid.
Yeah, the help to become happy. We
Mm-hmm.
have to find that for ourselves. We are not helped in gaining happiness, and
Mm.
that and it can be difficult actually because, as you said, our minds are sometimes set on the opposite. So sometimes we need help in order to be happy, but we don't get that help.
Yeah,
And if we
it
choose
really
to do it,
should.
we have to pay 850 crowns an hour.
Yeah, I mean, the point the Dalai Lama makes is, this should really be part of our education system. We
Exactly.
should teach children,
Exactly.
right from the beginning of their life, what brings happiness. I mean, some people are doing it. It's starting to happen from these mind and life conferences. People are starting to take these ideas into education, and it's happening. But yeah, it's certainly not mass education. So it just makes so much sense that we teach children how to manage their emotions, how to manage their anger and their frustration and their fear and anxiety, and how to have more love and compassion and find peaceful ways of solving conflicts rather than fighting. Yeah, it would make such a difference. How to get along with other people. Yeah, your partner, your children. Yeah, it's so important.
It's nice that there are places like this where you can come.
Hmm.
Yeah, be focused on happiness. It's really
Yeah, yeah. I think what is happening in the Mind and Life conferences, but also in positive psychology, around the same time that this book came out, there was this new movement in psychology called positive psychology, which focuses more on the cultivation of positive qualities, because in the beginning, for a long time, psychology was mainly focused on healing mental sickness, mental suffering, just taking care of the really unhappy people, but wasn't focused so much on how to help people be more happy. So that changed about 20 years ago. And now there's this, I don't know if it's really a branch of psychology, but it's called positive psychology. And so there are people who specialize in that. And there is treatments you can follow and so on.
I think something that really helped me in some ways, I think, was that the teachings about that we only have space for one set of emotion at a time. So can if you discard your negative emotions and make space for happiness, then there's no space for being in another mood, because you only have space for one set of emotions.
Yeah. No, well, they say you can have a negative and a positive
Yeah,
at the same time, at the
yeah,
same moment.
yeah.
So if there's anger in your mind, you cannot have love at the same time.
So if you're
So
focusing,
yeah,
if you're focusing positively, the other thing will go away.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And also they're impermanent. That's a wonderful thing. That anger and unhappiness and all of these kind of things, they're impermanent anyway. That's their nature. Like clouds in the sky, they come and they go. So even if they come into our mind, we don't have to worry so much. They're not going to stay forever. They'll go away, but we can also do things to kind of help them go away more quickly.
What are
And
techniques fighting anger?
for doing what?
Fighting the anger against the.
I talked about that last Thursday.
Ah, okay.
But yeah, I mean, there are lots of techniques. I think maybe some of them will come up later in the book, but there's a lot of methods. Patience, how to be more patient, how to have more loving kindness, compassion, trying to have compassion for the person instead of anger. Try to understand the other person, understand their point of view, put yourself in their shoes, those kind of things. There's, I don't have time now, but there's like whole books about anger, how to work with anger. So if you're interested, there are books. There's also a section in my book, How to Meditate on How to Deal with Anger. Um, so we'll get into that later, more details. But I just wanted to leave this one meditation at the end just to finish off. Maybe we could turn that machine off so it's not making so much noise. And so there's a quote in this book from the Dalai Lama, and Howard Cutler says he thinks it could be useful as a meditation on what's really important in our life and help us not get sort of carried away with things that aren't so useful or important. So just sit quietly, relax. So these are words from the Dalai Lama, and just let them come into your mind and float in your mind, and just see whatever comes up in response to these words. Sometimes when I meet old friends, it reminds me how quickly time passes, and it makes me wonder if we've utilized our time properly or not. Proper utilization of time is so important. While we have this body, and especially this amazing human brain, I think every minute is something precious. Our day to day existence is very much alive with hope. although there is no guarantee of our future. There is no guarantee that tomorrow at this time we will be here. But still, we are working for that purely on the basis of hope. So we need to make the best use of our time. I believe that the proper utilization of time is this. If you can, serve other people, other sentient beings. If not, at least refrain from harming them. I think that is the whole basis of my philosophy. So let us reflect on what is truly of value in life, what gives meaning to our lives, and set our priorities on the basis of that. The purpose of our life needs to be positive. We weren't born with the purpose of causing trouble, harming others. For our life to be of value, I think we must develop basic good human qualities: warmth, kindness, compassion. Then our life becomes meaningful and more peaceful, happier. So, as we did last week at the end of the class, we could take a few minutes to think about some positive things about ourselves and about our life. This is actually a relatively easy and quick way to generate a feeling of happiness. Instead of just taking things for granted, to focus on the good things that we have, which can be as simple as our body. We have this human body, which may not be perfect, may not be exactly the way we like it to be, but it's alive, it works. We have legs and feet, arms and hands that work. We can move around and do lots of things with our body, including helping other people, doing good things for other people. We have eyes that see, ears that hear, nose that smells, taste buds that taste. So we can have lots of enjoyments with our senses. And as His Holiness says, we have this amazing brain which is able to do so much, understand things, think of good things, happy things, positive things. So not everybody, not every human being has all of these things. Some are missing limbs, or their eyes do not work, their brain doesn't work properly, so they're not able to do all the things that we can do. So just that itself can be a cause of happiness, a source of happiness. Just the fact that we have this body and all the things we can do, all the abilities we have. We're so fortunate. So, if you do feel a sense of happiness, joy, gratitude by thinking about this, then let that feeling spread through your body. Let it penetrate every part of your body, every cell, molecule, and atom in your body. Just like when you go outside in the sun and feel the warmth of the sun penetrating your body, filling your body with warmth. Let this feeling of joy and gratitude fill your body completely. And we can also share this positive feeling with others, at least on the level of wishing, aspiration. How wonderful it would be if every person, every being could also experience such happiness. So now let's finish this session by mentally dedicating the positive energy we've created tonight. So we started off with a positive motivation, wanting that this session here tonight be beneficial for not only ourselves, but also for others, for the world. Remember that, and now mentally dedicate the positive energy we've created here tonight, that it will bring peace and happiness, well-being, freedom from suffering and problems to all other people, all beings all over the world. May it bring an end to war and violence, other kinds of harm that people give to other people, to animals, to the environment. May all people stop doing those actions and instead only do helpful actions to others, to the world. And may this positive energy help us all get in touch with our potential for enlightenment, help us getting closer to enlightenment. Okay, thank you.